They told you love was sacred. They told you marriage was safety. But tonight, I will show you the black altar, where love becomes a weapon, where vows become chains, and where death sleeps between the sheets. Imagine this: a woman who smiled in white lace, whispered eternal devotion in candlelight, and then buried not one husband, not two, but 8. Each man, healthy and strong, cut down in silence. No bullet, no bloodbath, just a quiet hand guiding life into the grave. 8 funerals, 8 coffins, 8 grieving families who whispered, "She just has terrible luck." But behind the veil of tragedy, a predator watched the earth swallow her lovers, while she grew richer, freer, untouchable. Her name was Ruth Holloway. To neighbors, she was charm embodied. To churches, she was grace. To men, she was salvation in flesh. But to the graveyards, she was a steady client. And what no one dared to say aloud, what the whispers never reached, is this: Ruth didn't love men. She fed on them. She studied their weaknesses, their hopes, their faith, and then she destroyed them, quietly, methodically, as though marriage itself was the mask of her hunting. This is not merely the story of a killer. This is the story of control, the rawest kind. Because Ruth Holloway teaches us something dark. You don't need an army to conquer. You don't need weapons to kill. You only need trust. And trust is the deadliest poison ever brewed. So ask yourself, as we descend together, how many faces smile at you while holding a dagger behind their teeth? How many oaths, how many systems, how many institutions preach loyalty while slowly burying you alive? Ruth's 8 husbands aren't just bones in the dirt. They are warnings, symbols, proof that love, family, even covenant, can be turned into ritual slaughter when the wrong hands pull the strings. Tonight, I will not simply recount her crimes. I will peel back to the veil that polite history pulled over her name. And as we go deeper, you will realize Ruth Holloway's 8 coffins are not just hers. They are ours. They are what happens when we surrender awareness, when we mistake beauty for virtue, when we hand power to someone who smiles like a savior, but breathes like a serpent. The first husband never saw it coming. He believed in her, believed in the warmth of her hand, the softness of her laugh, the way she leaned close as though the world could collapse and she would still be there. He thought he had won life's greatest prize. But death came quietly, like a thief slipping under the door. He fell sick, strangely sick, his body draining away, while doctors muttered guesses. And when the coffin was sealed, Ruth wore black. Her tears, they said, looked real enough. She whispered prayers with a trembling voice, and the town pitied her. Poor Ruth, so young, so unlucky. But the poison of her story was already in motion. Because the truth is, Ruth didn't kill once. She rehearsed. She studied. She learned how grief shields a widow, how suspicion dissolves in sympathy, how tears erase the question. Why? She learned that the strongest alibi is sorrow itself, and that is the moment she became something else. Not a woman, not a wife, but a force, a creature hidden in plain sight, perfecting the art of vanishing her sins beneath ritual mourning. Her second husband walked straight into the trap. They saw him as a rescuer, a man giving a poor widow her second chance at happiness. But months later, he too was gone. Another sickness, another unexplained decline. And once more, the same theater. Ruth in black, clutching her Bible, whispering about fate's cruelty. They believed her because belief was easier than doubt. Because no one wanted to see the wolf In the wedding veil, by the time her third husband died, some began to murmur. But power thrives in silence, and silence always bows to performance. Ruth had perfected the widow's mask, eyes swollen, hands trembling, her lips trembling with, "Why me, Lord?" The world nodded and gave her pity, while she gave the grave another offering. But let me tell you the secret no one wants spoken. Ruth's husbands weren't saint men. They were sacrifices. Each death was a stone in her foundation, each funeral a curtain hiding her rise. And the pattern you are about to see is not an accident. It is a design. A dark architecture built on 8 bodies, 8 lies, 8 perfect deaths. Patterns are the language of power. Men die in wars, and history calls it tragedy. Men die in chains, and history calls it progress. But when men die in the arms of the same woman, over and over again, history looks away. Why? Because patterns expose truth, and truth unsettles the order that rules us. By her third husband's burial, Ruth Holloway had already proven something terrifying. Death bends to ritual. She didn't need violence. She didn't need noise. All she needed was patience and a mask. Understand this. The mask is the most effective weapon of control humanity has ever invented. Kings wore crowns as masks. Priests wore robes as masks. Institutions wear ideals as masks. And Ruth wore love. She wrapped herself in it, and it made her untouchable. Do you see the genius of it? If she had been cruel, if she had been distant, suspicion might have crawled out of the shadows. But she was warmth incarnate, devotion personified, the very picture of loyalty, until loyalty became lethal. The mask created blindness, and blindness gave her the power of a god, the ability to take life without consequence. Think about your own world. How many masks surround you now? How many faces play at friendship, while their true intent coils like smoke in the dark? How many systems preach safety while engineering dependence? This is Ruth's lesson. The most dangerous predator is the one you invite in. Her fourth husband sealed the pattern. By then, whispers had become murmurs, and yet, no one acted. Why? Because society itself plays along. Communities protect the masks they want to believe in. Neighbors said, "It can't be her. She's too kind, too fragile." The lie wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who defended it. That is the true nature of control, to make the lie so comforting that others will guard it for you. And so, as Ruth stood over her fourth husband's grave, the graveyard wasn't just filling with bodies. It was filling with proof. Proof that once trust becomes a weapon, the victim himself will hand you the blade. By the fourth burial, something strange was happening. The town no longer just pitied Ruth Holloway. They revered her. She was no longer a mere widow. She had become a symbol of endurance, a woman cursed by fate, yet unbroken, a living monument to suffering. And that is the trick no one wants to acknowledge. The deeper the trail of bodies, the stronger the mask becomes. People began to say she was chosen, touched by divine misfortune, a lamb carrying the sins of chance. But in truth, she was the butcher wearing lamb's wool. Ruth had discovered the forbidden symmetry of tragedy. Repetition sanctifies crime. Kill once, and you are condemned. Kill twice, and you are suspected. Kill 3, 4, 5 times, and suddenly, people stop believing it could even be possible. They call it coincidence. They call it fate. They call it mystery, because the human mind cannot stare into the abyss for long. It must invent a story that softens the terror. And Ruth knew this. She weaponized it. Her husbands became steps in a ladder, each one lifting her higher. Each funeral, a coronation of her control. Think of it. 8 men, each stronger than the last, all swallowed by a woman who never raised her voice, never spilled blood in daylight. Poison, whispers, subtle manipulations of food and medicine. These were her instruments. Her victims didn't fight back because they never saw the battlefield. They thought they were safe in the arms of love, while love itself was the executioner. But pause here. Reflect. Is this not the mirror of what we see in every age of power? Men step into banks, governments, institutions believing they are safe, believing the mask of care. And slowly, without struggle, their strength drains away. Their choices narrow. Their freedom dies. And when the final nail is driven, they thank their captors for guiding them. Ruth was not just a widow. She was a prototype, a hum, an embodiment of the system itself. So when the earth swallowed her 4th husband, it was not merely soil closing over flesh. It was a ritual, a repetition, a rhythm, like drums echoing through history, reminding us of one truth. Power thrives not by force, but by faith. And when faith is corrupted, every vow becomes a death sentence. The 5th man should have known. By then, even the walls of the town whispered. They said Ruth Holloway was cursed, that men who married her signed their names in a book already stained with death. But men are blinded by 2 things, hope and desire. And Ruth fed both with surgical precision. She promised love. She promised loyalty. She promised the one thing every man craves in silence, peace. Peace in the arms of a woman who seemed to carry heaven in her gaze. And so he ignored the warnings, ignored the silence that followed him when he announced his engagement, ignored the weight in the eyes of those who watched him walk toward her. He thought he had found salvation. Instead, he had walked into the 5th grave. By now, Ruth was no longer simply killing. She was orchestrating. Her methods had sharpened. Her poison, more precise. Her timing, flawless. Each death arrived like clockwork, clean and quiet, so well disguised that even suspicion began to look like madness. And the brilliance of it all was this. Ruth had built herself into a paradox. The more men she buried, the less people believed she could possibly be guilty. Because what kind of monster could do such a thing? The mind refuses to accept what the heart cannot process. And so, the mask only grew stronger. Her 5th husband withered like the others, slipping into weakness, fading until the grave swallowed him whole. Ruth wept. Ruth prayed. Ruth clutched at heaven with a trembling hand, and the town fell silent again. It was fate. It was mystery. It was destiny. But listen carefully. Ruth's story is not just about her. It is a mirror. How many times have you seen the same tragedy repeat in your own world? How many times do men fall for the same lie, the same mask, the same poisoned promise, again and again? And every time it happens, they tell themselves, this time is different. This time, it's safe. This time, it's real. But the rhythm of control never changes. Ruth knew that. And so do the powers that rule your life. By the 5th grave, the pattern was undeniable. But the world looked away, because to admit the truth would mean admitting that trust itself can be fatal. And that is a truth too heavy for most to carry. The 6th husband was not a fool. He had heard the stories. He had seen the shadows trailing her name. Yet he still walked willingly into her arms. Why? because men are drawn to danger when it wears a veil of beauty. He thought he would be the exception, the one man strong enough, clever enough, destined enough to survive where others had fallen. But Ruth Holloway was not hunting individuals anymore. She was weaving destiny itself, and no man escapes a pattern once it becomes ritual. By now, the town had split. Some whispered that she was cursed, a magnet for misfortune. Others swore she was innocent, a woman too sweet, too pious, too gentle to be guilty of anything so monstrous. And in that division lay her protection. Because while people argue, predators thrive. Division has always been the shield of power. When men cannot agree on what is real, the liar walks free. The sixth husband began to sicken in the same silent, ghost-like way as the others. His strength seeped out of him night by night, as though he were being slowly erased. The doctors fumbled. The neighbors prayed. Ruth wept. And when he finally descended into the grave, the whispers grew louder. But still, no one acted. Because to accuse Ruth would mean accusing the very fabric of trust itself. And few are willing to destroy the mask they've built their comfort upon. Do you see it now? With 6 coffins behind her, Ruth Holloway was no longer merely a woman with suspicious luck. She had become myth. Her story began to escape the boundaries of the town, whispered like folklore, retold in gasps and warnings. Marry her, and you die. She was half widow, half phantom, living proof that even in a modern age, ancient archetypes of the femme fatale still walked among us, quiet, patient, lethal. And here is the darker truth. Societies need figures like Ruth. They need them as vessels for fear, as proof that evil wears, a face too ordinary to spot. She became not just a killer, but a legend. And legends are harder to kill than people. 6 husbands gone, 6 rituals complete. And still, the mask held firm. But the 7th death, that would change everything. The 7th husband entered Ruth's life, like a moth circling a flame. By then, the warnings were louder, the rumors sharper. People looked at him with pity before the vows were even spoken. Some whispered behind his back, calling him a dead man walking. But pride is the sweetest bait of all. He believed he could tame her legend, silence the gossip, rewrite the script with his survival. He told himself the others had been weak, unlucky, cursed. He was different, stronger, sharper, the kind of man no woman could bring to ruin. But Ruth had perfected her art. She no longer even needed to hurry. She knew the 7th grave would be dug, and she knew no one would stop her. Confidence makes a predator unstoppable, and she carried herself with a serenity that was almost divine, as though the deaths behind her had been a form of consecration rather than suspicion. Yet something changed with the 7th. He lingered longer in his sickness. His decline was slower, more tortured, almost theatrical. And for the first time, people began to notice cracks in the performance. Ruth's tears seemed rehearsed. Her prayers felt like echoes instead of cries. The town that once adored her began to grow uneasy. Whispers became questions. Was it possible, after all this time, that the woman they pitied, the woman they defended, was in truth the architect of every grave that lined her past? The 7th husband's funeral was different. There was no reverence, no awe, only silence, heavy, suffocating silence. The kind that comes when people finally realize they have been complicit in something monstrous. They didn't say the words out loud, but you could feel it. Fear had shifted. No longer was Ruth seen as a victim of fate. She was beginning to be seen for what she truly was, and yet she still walked free. because suspicion without proof is nothing. And Ruth's genius was proof. Every bottle, hidden, every dosage precise, every performance immaculate. She killed in the shadows, where evidence could never cling to her hands. 7 graves, 7 patterns. And now the town was no longer simply haunted by her legend. It was trapped by it. Because once you suspect a mask, tearing it away means tearing apart your own belief system. Most people aren't strong enough to do that. But the eighth would be unavoidable. The 8th husband was the final chapter, though he didn't know it. He thought himself chosen, the man destined to redeem her story, to heal her curse. People begged him not to go through with it. Some even joked nervously at the wedding, their laughter trembling with fear. But once again, Ruth's mask was flawless. She played the grieving widow reborn, desperate only for a quiet life, free from tragedy. And he believed her. He chose to believe her. Because sometimes, the heart doesn't want truth. It wants comfort, even if it kills. From the moment he entered her home, his fate was sealed. The rhythm had become too perfect, the pattern too refined. His body began to wither in the same slow, suffocating decline. Nights of weakness, days of confusion, doctors scratching their heads, friends wringing their hands, and Ruth, always at his bedside, whispering prayers, holding his hand with the tenderness of an angel while tightening the grip of the executioner. But this time, the world was watching closer. By now, the whispers had become storms. Neighbors saw the inevitability of it. Authorities felt the chill of suspicion pressing against them. And when his coffin finally closed, the silence that followed was different. It was no longer pity. It was dread. The legend had completed its circle. 8 men gone. 8 graves aligned like dark constellations in the soil. Ruth Holloway was no longer a widow in mourning. She was something else entirely, a phantom wrapped in flesh, a force that defied coincidence, defied reason, defied the very idea of innocence. Her story was no longer a string of tragedies. It had become an unholy liturgy, a ritual offering repeated 8 times until the world itself had to bow to its weight. And here is where the forbidden truth reveals itself. Ruth didn't need to escape justice. She transcended it. Because when a pattern becomes myth, myth becomes untouchable. She was no longer merely a suspect in 8 deaths. She was the killer widow, a name whispered like a curse, a title that carried more power than any courtroom could destroy. This is where the descent deepens. Because Ruth's story is not only about murder, it is about the systems that let her thrive. And if you think she was the only one weaving death behind a mask, you have not yet opened your eyes. 8 men buried, 8 lives drained into the soil. And yet Ruth Holloway never swung a blade, never left a bloody trail, never once stood over a body with her hands stained red. That is the real horror. Violence is obvious. Anyone can see it. Anyone can condemn it. But quiet destruction, hidden under rituals of love and loyalty, that is power perfected. And it is the same power you live under now. Do you think Ruth's story is an isolated nightmare? Look closer. Entire empires operate exactly as she did. They promise safety, devotion, salvation. They tell you, trust us. We care for you. We protect you. And while you rest in their arms, they drain you. Your labor, your freedom, your mind, they take piece after piece, so slowly, so softly, that you don't even notice the coffin being built around you. Ruth was a prototype. Her mask was personal, intimate. But institutions wear masks far grander, stitched with flags, faith, and authority. Just as Ruth disguised poison in tenderness, so too do systems disguise control in protection. And just like her husbands, men submit willingly, believing they are safe while walking straight into the grave. The eighth death was the proof. Because after 8 men fell, suspicion could no longer be denied. And yet, Ruth remained untouchable. Why? Because society itself had built her mask. The neighbors who pitied her, the churches that praised her devotion, the officials who looked the other way, everyone who wanted to believe in her innocence more than they wanted to confront her guilt. Power thrives because people defend the lie that comforts them. So here's the real question. How many Ruth Holloways exist today, hiding behind the masks of government, religion, corporations, even relationships? How many systems do you serve, smile at, defend, while they drain you in silence? If Ruth could build her throne on 8 graves, what could an empire build on millions? Her husbands were not just victims. They were symbols of blindness, and blindness is the fuel of control. Once you see this pattern, you can never go back. You can never look at trust the same way again. That is why this knowledge is dangerous, because once you recognize the mask, the illusion of safety shatters, and the world suddenly looks exactly as it is: predatory. The question burns like fire. Why did 8 men follow Ruth Holloway to their graves? Why did they ignore the whispers, the warnings, the pattern that glared like a torch in the dark? The answer is simple and terrifying. Men do not die merely from poison. They die from the stories they tell themselves. Each husband believed he was different. Each believed that Ruth's past was misfortune, not design. They believed in the mask, because the mask gave them what they craved most: purpose, love, validation, peace. Men will silence their instincts, kill their doubts, even blind themselves willingly, just to protect the comfort of a story that makes them feel chosen. And that is the cruelest truth of all. The predator does not always hunt the prey. Sometimes the prey delivers itself to the predator's door, begging to be devoured. Think of it. How many times have you convinced yourself that the system cares for you, that the job that drains you is security, that the government that watches you is protection, that the creed or covenant that controls you is salvation? The human mind clings to masks because reality is too unbearable. And that is why Ruth Holloway's power was absolute. Her husbands weren't just poisoned, they were believers. And belief is stronger than arsenic. The deeper lesson is this: the predator's greatest gift is not cunning, but reflection. Ruth reflected back to her husbands what they wanted to see: devotion, beauty, loyalty, purity. And they gave her everything, including their lives. Institutions do the same. They reflect back your hunger for safety, for identity, for meaning. And you give them your freedom. The 7th and 8th husbands should have known. The evidence was carved into the earth itself. 7 graves lined like warnings. 7 men erased by the same woman. And still, they chose blindness. That is not coincidence. That is human nature. And Ruth understood human nature better than most rulers, priests, or kings. So here's the forbidden truth. A man's destruction rarely comes from his enemies. It comes from the masks he refuses to tear away. That is why Ruth Holloway's 8 husbands are not just a story of murder. They are a prophecy, a mirror held to every man who chooses comfort over truth, even as the grave yawns wide before him. Look closer at Ruth Holloway's trail of death, and you'll see something older than her, older than the town, older than every courtroom that failed to stop her. Her 8 husbands were not just victims, they were offerings. Each one fed into a rhythm as old as civilization. Ritual sacrifice disguised as fate. In the ancient world, kings built their power on blood. Temples demanded sacrifices to maintain order. Armies slaughtered in the name of gods. Always, death was dressed in ritual. Always, the mask made it sacred. Ruth may have never called herself a priestess, but in practice, she was one. Each death was deliberate, hidden behind prayers and mourning. Each burial was a silent altar. Each tear, part of the ritual and what makes ritual powerful. Repetition. When 1 man died, it was tragedy. When 8 men died, it became something else. A cycle, a pattern, a liturgy of death that transformed Ruth into something larger than human. That's why her story spread beyond the town. People weren't just frightened of her. They were fascinated. They sensed something mythic pulsing beneath the surface, something that whispered of ancient powers, resurfacing in modern flesh. But here is the darker truth. The ritual never ended. It continues around you now. Not in backyards or bedrooms, but in systems designed to drain men in silence. Work becomes ritual sacrifice. Debt becomes ritual sacrifice. Wars become ritual sacrifice. Men give their blood and strength, told it is noble, told it is necessary. And the institutions collect their offerings with the same serenity Ruth displayed at her husband's bedsides. Ruth's genius was not her poison, it was her performance. She made each death look like fate. And fate is the oldest mask of all. Kings called it destiny. Priests called it the will of heaven. Ruth called it tragedy. Different words, same machinery. A lie strong enough to turn murder into meaning. Ruth Holloway killed in the shadows of a home. But her method, her brilliance, was a blueprint used by powers far larger than her. She taught us this. You don't need chains if you can weave devotion. You don't need a battlefield if you can turn the bedroom, the church, the office, the courthouse into your hunting ground. The most enduring control is not built on force. It is built on consent. And men will consent to their own destruction if you give them the illusion of love, safety, or destiny. Think of it. Governments tell you to sacrifice freedom for security. Corporations tell you to sacrifice time for prosperity. Churches tell you to sacrifice reason for salvation. Each of these demands is delivered not with threats, but with tenderness. They whisper, "Trust us. We care for you. We protect you." And like Ruth, they stand at your bedside, smiling, while your strength drains away. 8 men buried Ruth's truth into the soil, but her legacy lives in the way the world itself is structured. Look around you. Every system that binds you uses her mask. They offer you devotion, community, purpose, and beneath it lies extraction. Not poison in the glass, but poison in the contract, poison in the paycheck, poison in the creed. A slow death disguised as life. And here is the cruel genius. Just as Ruth's husbands defended her, the world defends its institutions. People will attack you for doubting them. They will say you are ungrateful, paranoid, cursed. They will guard the very systems that drain them. Just as Ruth's neighbors defended her after funeral upon funeral. That is the final trick of power. To make the prey police itself. The 8th grave was not the end of Ruth Holloway. It was the unveiling of a principle too uncomfortable for most men to face. That trust is the gateway to destruction when placed in the wrong hands. And that mask, once believed in, becomes nearly impossible to rip away. So understand this. Ruth Holloway is not simply a killer widow. She is a cipher, a symbol, a mirror. She shows you how men are controlled, how they are sacrificed, and how they will defend the very hands that poison them. If you see this clearly, you will never look at a promise, a vow, or a mask the same way again. It's easy to point at Ruth Holloway and call her a monster. It's easy to look at 8 coffins and think, that would never be me. I'd never be so blind. But that is the exact blindness that killed them. Every one of Ruth's husbands thought the same thing. They thought they were strong enough, sharp enough, immune to deception. And every one of them ended in the soil. So let me ask you directly, whose mask have you trusted? What hand do you still kiss while it quietly drains your strength? Is it the employer who promises stability while stealing decades of your life? The institution that claims to guide you while binding you in dogma? The government that swears to protect you while tightening chains around your freedom? Or is it closer? Someone who smiles at you, whispers devotion, but feeds on your weakness behind closed doors. This is the heart of Ruth's legacy. The predator doesn't always hunt. Sometimes it waits. It builds an altar of comfort and watches as men kneel willingly, offering themselves. The coffin is not forced. It is chosen. That is what makes her story unbearable. That is what makes it dangerous. Do not dismiss this as the past. Do not hide behind the illusion that you are too clever to fall. Ruth Holloway killed 8 men not with force, but with belief. Belief was her weapon. Belief was her battlefield. And belief is still the currency of control in your world. So here is your crossroads. You can continue living blind, wrapping yourself in the same comforting illusions that killed her husbands. Or you can rip away the masks and face the abyss for what it is. It will hurt. It will strip away the lies you've built your life on. But only then will you stop digging your own grave. Because every man has a Ruth Holloway in his life, whether it wears the face of a woman, an institution, or a system. The question is, will you see it before it buries you? By the 14th minute of her story, Ruth Holloway isn't just a figure in history anymore. She has become a reflection staring back at you. Because her power wasn't poison. Her power wasn't beauty. Her power was blindness, and blindness still rules men today. Think of the silence in that town after the 8th funeral. People knew. Deep down, they knew. They felt the wrongness in their bones, but they said nothing. They did nothing, because action demands sacrifice, and silence is easier. Silence is safer. And so, Ruth thrived. Understand this. Silence is the soil where power grows. Every tyrant, every manipulator, every system that feeds on men survives because the masses choose silence over confrontation. This is why her story should terrify you, because it exposes the truth. Men are not destroyed by force. They are destroyed by consent. Her husbands consented to the mask. The town consented to the lie. And the world consents every single day to its own chains. Ask yourself now, what lies do you defend because they're easier than truth? What rituals drain your strength while you nod and pretend it's normal? Who is poisoning your life so slowly you call it fate instead of control? Ruth's genius was patience. She never rushed. She let her husbands weaken day by day until they no longer had the strength to resist. That's how the systems work, too. They don't destroy you in a single blow. They grind you down until the coffin feels like a bed. And this is why you are here, listening. Because something in you senses it already, that you are being drained, that the mask is smiling at you right now, that Ruth's story is not about her, it is about you. But hear me clearly. Once you see the mask, you can never go back. You cannot unknow it. You cannot return to the illusion. That is the transformation. That is the descent. And only a few men ever walk it. You are standing on the threshold, and soon I will ask you to step fully across. This is where the descent sharpens. 8 graves behind Ruth Holloway, and the soil itself whispers the truth. Love can be a mask, devotion can be a cage, and trust can be the poison that kills you. Her husbands didn't die because they were weak. They died because they refused to open their eyes. They chose blindness. They chose the mask, and that choice buried them. But you are not here to be buried. You are here to awaken. That is why you've stayed this long. Because something inside you knows this isn't just a story about a widow in black lace. It is a warning about the world wrapped around you right now. And here, I demand something of you. Because knowledge without action is nothing. If you want to break the mask, if you want to carve your name out of the pattern, you must declare it. Right now, in the comments, I want you to write these words twice. Once for your mind, once for your soul. I see the mask. Write it, and you lock in your transformation. Write it, and you step out of blindness into awareness. Write it, and you mark yourself as a man who refuses the coffin, who refuses to be the 9th grave in someone else's ritual. Do not underestimate this act. It may feel small, but symbols are the language of power. That is why Ruth's story haunts us, because repetition, ritual, and symbol transform ordinary deaths into legend. When you declare, "I see the mask," you are rewriting your own legend. You are telling the world, and more importantly yourself, that you will not submit to the smile that hides the dagger. Her husbands were swallowed because they never declared it. They never named what was killing them. But you are not them. You are here. You are awake. And this is where you choose to step into awareness that most men fear, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So pause. Write it now, twice. And when you return, we descend further, because the second half of this story is darker, sharper, and closer to the world you walk in every day. You've written the words. You've stepped across the line. And now, the descent deepens. Because Ruth Holloway's 8 husbands were not only victims of her poison, they were victims of the same architecture that rules the world around you. Her method was not invention. It was reflection. She mirrored what every structure of power already knows. Men destroy themselves when they trust the mask. Look at how she moved. She offered safety. She offered devotion. She offered the story every man longs to believe. And then, slowly, she siphoned life until only silence remained. Is this not exactly how systems work? They cradle you with promises. Work hard and you'll prosper. Obey and you'll be safe. Believe and you'll be saved. And yet, year by year, you feel the drain. You feel the fatigue. The energy leaves. The freedom shrinks. The coffin builds itself around you. This is why Ruth matters. She is not merely a killer widow. She is a cipher for the larger truth. Control never looks like chains at first. It looks like love. It looks like protection. It looks like a vow, a creed, a flag. And just like her husbands, men cling to the mask because it feels better to believe than to admit betrayal. By the time Ruth buried her 8th husband, suspicion was no longer avoidable, and yet she still walked free. Do you understand the weight of that? Even when the truth stood naked in the graveyard, people still chose blindness. That is how powerful the mask can be. That is why men defend the very systems that bleed them. Because tearing away the mask feels like tearing away reality itself. And here is where it becomes dangerous. Because once you see the mask, you are no longer safe. You cannot move like the others. You cannot nod along in silence. The world will sense the shift in you, and it will resist. Just as Ruth's neighbors resisted the whispers of truth, so too will people resist you when you begin to see, but you have already spoken the phrase. You have already crossed the line. And now you will see what most men never dare to confront. How Ruth Holloway's mask was only a fragment of a much larger machinery designed to turn men into offerings. Quiet, obedient, and blind. Ruth Holloway buried 8 men with her poison. But what she really buried was a prophecy. This is what happens when men surrender awareness. This is what happens when trust becomes a weapon. Her story is not locked in the past. It is a mirror held up to the present. Because today, the poison doesn't sit in a glass. It flows through the structures of your life. Look at how men live now. They labor decades for companies that will discard them in a heartbeat. They hand their sweat, their youth, their very health to systems that profit while they wither. They are told this is noble. They are told this is destiny. Just as Ruth whispered prayers at her husband's bedsides, the world whispers, be patient, work harder, obey longer, sacrifice more. And like her husbands, men believe it. They believe until the body gives out, until the grave swallows what little remains. The truth is unbearable, which is why most refuse to see it. Men are still being sacrificed, but the rituals are hidden behind modern masks. Debt is one coffin. Addiction is another. The silent despair of obedience, another still. The altar is everywhere, but the poison is disguised as progress. Ruth's story strips away the illusion. She teaches us that the predator doesn't need force when it has patience. She shows us that the victim doesn't even need to be hunted. He will walk willingly into the ritual if the mask is beautiful enough. And that is the same trap men step into now. Her 8th grave was not the end. It was the beginning of recognition, the moment when whispers turned into dread. And that is exactly where you stand in your own life, at the edge of recognition. You already know something is wrong. You feel it, the fatigue, the emptiness, the endless cycle of giving more and receiving less. That is the poison. That is the ritual. Ruth Holloway's poison was measured in teaspoons, hidden in food and drink, delivered so gently, her husbands mistook it for care. That is exactly how modern control works. Invisible, incremental, disguised as devotion. You do not see the chains until you are too weak to break them. Think about it. How many men live their entire lives under the illusion of choice? They choose jobs that strip their time. They choose debts that strip their freedom. They choose comforts that strip their strength. And all the while the system smiles, whispers, this is progress. This is success. This is love. Just like Ruth at the bedside, stroking a hand while the life drains out. This is psychological warfare, perfected. Because if the poison is too obvious, the victim resists. But if the poison is disguised as security, as devotion, as a promise of future reward, The victim not only drinks it, he defends it. Ruth never had to fight her husbands. They swallowed the lie willingly. They defended her honor to the last breath. That is how control sustains itself, when the prey protects the predator. Look at the parallels. Ruth offered love, then delivered death. Systems offer security, then deliver dependency. Ruth disguised poison as care. Systems disguise exploitation as progress. Ruth's neighbors silenced their doubts. Modern men silence theirs too, because it is easier than facing betrayal. Do you see the pattern yet? It is not about Ruth alone. It is about the machinery of power itself. She was a fragment, a warning, a microcosm. What she did to 8 men, entire systems do to millions. Quietly, patiently, relentlessly. Her story forces you to confront the truth. Control does not look like chains or threats. It looks like devotion. It feels like safety. It sounds like love. And that is why it works. That is why men march into graves, both literal and symbolic, smiling, believing they are cared for while being consumed. The 8th coffin closed long ago, but the ritual has not ended. It continues every day. Ruth Holloway's story is not isolated. It is a thread woven into the darker fabric of history. She played her part on a small stage. 1 town, 8 husbands, a trail of graves. But the design she followed has been rehearsed by empires, sanctified by religions, and perfected by governments. Her poison was not just chemical, it was archetypal. Think of the myths you were raised on. How many stories glorify sacrifice? How many whisper that your suffering is holy, that your obedience is noble, that your silence is strength? These are not stories of liberation. They are blueprints for control. They train men to lie down in the coffin and call it destiny. Ruth did it with arsenic. Institutions do it with doctrine. Religions throughout history promised paradise in exchange for obedience, demanded tithes while the flock starved, justified suffering as the will of unseen gods. Governments promised protection while bleeding their citizens with taxes, conscription, surveillance. And the people defended it, even as it consumed them, because just like Ruth's husbands, they believed the mask. They wanted the mask to be true, even as it killed them. This is the essence of the pattern. Conceal the poison in devotion. Wrap exploitation in beauty. Turn obedience into virtue. And watch as men defend their own destruction. Ruth understood this instinctively. The moment she whispered care at her husband's bedsides, she became the embodiment of empire, religion, authority itself. A mask that smiles while the dagger slides between the ribs. Understand, the coffins of Ruth's 8 husbands were small symbols of a far greater graveyard, the graveyard of entire civilizations, buried because they trusted their rulers, their priests, their saviors. Trust became blindness, blindness became obedience, and obedience became death. So when you hear Ruth's name, do not think of a single widow in black lala. Think of the ancient machinery that moves beneath her, the eternal design, the mask that devours while it comforts, the hand that blesses while it kills. Her story is your initiation into that recognition. By now, Ruth Holloway is no longer a distant figure. She is closer than you want to admit. Because the truth is this: every man alive has a Ruth at his side, a mask that smiles while it drains him. The question is not whether you face one. The question is, have you seen yours yet? Look closely. Where in your life do you feel the slow drain? Where do you give more than you receive, day after day, year after year, until the strength leaves your bones? Is it the job that feeds on your hours, but never gives freedom? Is it the debt that consumes your future while promising comfort? Is it the relationship where devotion is weaponized against you? Or is it the inner voice, trained by the system, that tells you obedience is safety, silence is virtue, sacrifice is noble? Understand, this is the modern poison, not a teaspoon of arsenic, but 1,000 small compromises, not a single grave in the earth, but the long burial of your spirit beneath expectation, routine, and submission. And like Ruth's husbands, most men defend it until the very end. They say, "This is just life. This is how it must be." They kneel at the altar of resignation, even as the coffin closes. But you are different, because you've already declared, "I see the mask." And that declaration forces you to confront the most dangerous question of all. Which mask in your life is poisoning you right now? Not yesterday, not someday. Now, do not flinch from the answer. Do not excuse it, because the moment you name it, the mask begins to lose power. Ruth's husbands never named it. They drank the poison and called it love. That is why they lie in the ground and you still breathe. This is where the story turns from history into mirror. Ruth is not simply a widow. She is a test, and every man must answer it. Will you keep drinking what drains you? Or will you rip the mask away and face what hides beneath? Ruth Holloway's husbands never saw the mask. That was their doom. But you have seen it. And now you must understand what that vision costs. Because once you pierce the illusion, you no longer belong to the herd. You no longer move unnoticed. The system feels it. Just as Ruth's neighbors grew uneasy when whispers spread, so too does the world grow uneasy when a man refuses to drink the poison. Think about what happens to those who step outside obedience. The whistleblower, the heretic, the exile, the man who says, "I will not kneel." History remembers them not because they lived quietly, but because they shattered illusions, and the system moved to destroy them. The same ritual that buried Ruth's husbands seeks to bury the man who resists. This is why the descent is dangerous. To see the mask is one thing. To act against it is another. Because once you withdraw your obedience, once you stop defending the lie, you are marked. You are no longer safe. You have declared war against the order that thrives on your blindness. And yet, this is the path of power. Because freedom cannot coexist with obedience to poison. A man must choose. Live as prey, comfortable in illusion, or rise as predator, hunted but awake. Ruth's story forces this decision into your hands. You cannot unhear it. You cannot unknow it. You either embrace the mask again and return to sleep, or you accept that awareness makes you dangerous. Her husbands chose blindness and died quietly. But imagine if just one had looked her in the eye and said, "I see you." Everything would have changed. The ritual would have broken. The mask would have shattered. That is the power of a man who refuses the poison. You are that man now. Do not think for a moment that recognition is harmless. It is fire. It burns the illusions others cling to, and they will resist you for it. But let them, because their resistance only proves the truth. Once you see the mask, you are no longer theirs. You belong to yourself. And that, above all else, is what the system fears. Do not think Ruth Holloway died with her last breath. Her mask is alive. It did not end in a small town with 8 coffins. It expanded, multiplied, evolved. Today, it wears new faces. Not one widow, but countless institutions. Not one kitchen with arsenic, but entire networks of influence designed to drain men silently, completely, irreversibly. Look at the screens in your home, the feeds you scroll, the voices you trust. Each promises connection, meaning, freedom. While behind the curtain, they siphon your attention, rewrite your thoughts, sculpt your desires. The poison is not in your cup, it is in your mind. And like Ruth at the bedside, the systems whisper, "This is for you. This is care. This is safety." And men believe it. They defend it. They cannot imagine life without it. Governments speak of protection, yet every law binds tighter. Corporations speak of opportunity, yet every paycheck keeps the leash short. Even the myths of culture itself, success, romance, patriotism, become carefully crafted poisons, delivered with a smile. Ruth's trick was not unique. It was universal. She merely revealed, in miniature, what power has always done at scale. The chilling truth is this: you are surrounded by Ruth Holloways. Their arsenic is invisible, but their hunger is endless. They want your time, your energy, your devotion, your obedience. And they know you will hand it over willingly if the mask is beautiful enough. Most men never see it. They scroll their lives away. They work their bodies to dust. They kneel at altars of false promises, and when the end comes, they whisper, "I did my duty." Just like Ruth's husbands, they mistake poison for love. They call betrayal devotion, and the graveyard fills. But you are awake now. You know the mask when you see it. You know the whisper is not care, but control. You know the hand that comforts may also be the hand that buries. And once you know this, you can no longer be ruled the same way. Ruth is not gone. She is everywhere. But the man who sees her, the man who names her, the man who refuses the poison, that man is no longer prey. He is the fracture in the system, the danger in the machine, and he cannot be ignored. When Ruth Holloway's 8th husband was lowered into the ground, the neighbors whispered. Fear crept into their voices. They didn't say it aloud, but they felt it. Something is wrong here. That same unease is what the system feels when a man refuses the poison, when he withdraws obedience, when he stops drinking the lie. Suddenly, he is no longer predictable, no longer safe. He terrifies them. Do you understand why? Because the system thrives on your silence. It thrives on your willingness to kneel. It thrives on your fear of standing alone. The moment you reject the mask, you break the cycle. And when the cycle breaks, the system sees its reflection. Weak, fragile, dependent. Ruth's power only existed because her husbands trusted her. Without their blindness, she was nothing but a woman with a vial of powder. So it is with the world around you. Governments, corporations, institutions, all of them appear mighty, immovable, eternal. But strip away your obedience, and they tremble. Because power without prey is nothing. Authority without devotion is empty. The predator cannot exist when the prey refuses the role. This is why men who awaken are hunted, silenced, mocked, exiled. Not because they are wrong, but because they are dangerous. They expose the truth that the mask is fragile. They show others that the poison only works when willingly consumed. One man refusing becomes an example. 10 men refusing becomes a threat. 1,000 men refusing becomes a revolution. You must feel this in your bones. The system fears you, not the version of you that obeys, that kneels, that drinks from the cup. That man is harmless. That man is food. But the version of you who sees the mask, who tears it away, who refuses to be consumed, that man is untouchable. That man is feared. That man is free, and freedom is not offered. It is seized. Ruth never offered freedom to her husbands, she of Bethlehem, feared comfort, and they accepted death. But you are not them. You are the fracture, the rupture, the man who sees the mask and smiles, not in obedience, but in defiance. And the moment you embrace that truth, the entire system begins to shake. Ruth Holloway's story has taken you down into the grave, into the poison, into the whispers of betrayal. But here, in the depths, the real transformation begins. Because knowing the mask is not enough. Awareness must become weapon. Recognition must become power. Otherwise, you are nothing but a man staring into darkness with no torch to light the way. Understand this. Forbidden knowledge is dangerous only if you remain passive. If you carry it like a burden, it eats you alive. But if you wield it like a blade, it cuts chains. The truth is not meant to make you despair. It is meant to harden you, sharpen you, awaken you. Ruth's husbands never weaponized their suspicion. They doubted in silence, then died in silence. That was their failure, and it will not be yours. Every man who sees the mask has two choices: retreat into the coffin or rise as something the system cannot control. Rising requires brutality, not against others, but against illusion, against weakness, against the parts of yourself still tempted to drink the poison. You must strip them away. You must look into the mirror and declare, I refuse the mask. I refuse the chains. I refuse the slow death, disguised as devotion. When you do this, something shifts. The poisons of the world no longer enter you so easily. The lies no longer seduce. The traps no longer bind. You begin to move with clarity, with control, with a freedom that cannot be purchased or permitted, only seized. That is when the system fears you most. Not when you complain, not when you struggle, but when you see and still choose strength over submission. This is where the descent turns into ascent. You have stared into Ruth's darkness. You have seen the coffins. You have heard the whispers. And now you stand at the threshold of mastery. The very knowledge that enslaved others has become your weapon. The very pattern that consumed millions has become. Ohm your shield, and when you step forward with this weaponized awareness, you are no longer prey. You are no longer neighbor, husband, victim. You are something else entirely. Something the mask cannot seduce. Something the poison cannot kill. You are the fracture in the story. The man who lives where others have fallen. The man who sees and survives. 8 husbands lie in the ground, and the world forgets their names. But you will not forget, because their story was never just about them. It was about you, about every man who walks blindly into devotion, who drinks from poisoned cups, who dies defending illusions. Ruth Holloway is not simply a woman of history. She is a symbol of the eternal predator, and her husbands are symbols of what happens when men surrender sight, surrender power, surrender themselves. But you are not them. You have walked through their graves and stood over the whispers of their mistakes. You have seen the mask for what it is, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. You have crossed the threshold. That is why you feel it now, the unease, the fire in your chest, the sense that something inside you has shifted forever. That is the mark of transformation. That is the wound that never closes. Carry this with you. The world will offer you countless Ruths. Institutions, screens, leaders, lovers, ideologies. Each will wear a mask of care while draining your spirit. And most men will defend their own destruction, even as the poison spreads through their veins. But not you. Not anymore. You will not kneel. You will not drink. You will not mistake the dagger for a kiss, because once you hear this truth, once you carry it inside you, you are reborn. And rebirth is violent. It burns away the old self, the obedient self, the blind self, and leaves only the man who refuses. That refusal is your power. That refusal is your freedom. That refusal is what makes you dangerous. So leave this story marked. Leave it changed. Leave it knowing that you are not prey. You are the fracture in the cycle, the enemy of the mask, the man who will not be devoured. And if you feel that fire within you now, let it be seen. Write these words below, twice, so that the world knows you have crossed over. I see the mask once you write it. Yet you are no longer like other men. You have declared yourself awake. You have declared yourself untouchable. And from this day forward, nothing, not Ruth, not the system, not the poison, will ever own you again.